Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the Left of Str8 Show interviews, the premier podcast that shares the stories of our amazing LGBTQ community and, of course, fantastic straight allies, all from entertainment, foodies, books, music, and advocacy. I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton, and let's start talking. Well, welcome, friends. Today on our podcast, we are thrilled to have a true pioneer in the glam rock scene. The fearless Venus DeMars is in studio with me. Venus is not only an out trans singer, songwriter, and advocate, but also a cultural icon who's been defying the boundaries of gender and music for decades. Known for her bold performances, her raw lyricism, and striking visual style, Venus has built a career that challenges societal norms and uplifts all of us marginalized voices. Beyond her music, Venus is a passionate advocate for LGBTQ rights, using her platform to bring visibility to the trans community and push for a more inclusive world. Join us as we dive into the life, music, and mission of this groundbreaking artist. But first, take a look.
So strange, doesn't take change that you can't manage in your despair. Even right there, your damage. We are here, every last one, never will run. Even so, we know fear, taken in pain, but never in vain. We are free, free as the sky, never so high. We are free, free as the stars, even with scars.
Alrighty, guys, we are back. That is Even with Scars, my very special guest, Venus DeMars' latest solo outing here. Venus, welcome to the Left of Str8 Show. How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually just recovering from a head cold, so my voice, I can hit the low notes really well right now, which is
There
the
you go. Time to
upside.
get in the studio for those. I
Yeah.
like that. Well, welcome to the show. It's an honor to meet you. I mean, you've been such a pioneer for so long. I've gone through all the different phases of my music love, and glam rock was definitely there for a while. I appreciate everything you do. Talk to me about the start, though. Where did you grow up, and what kind of a kid were you growing up?
Well, of course, I should say that I was always trans, but it was back. I grew up in the '60s. There was no understanding what trans was. If you were interested in looking, if you were, you know, biologically or assigned male at birth, and you preferred to wear female clothes or imagine doing that, you were just thought of being gay. There wasn't an idea about trans, and even that discussion was nowhere in society. I grew up in Duluth. It's the second biggest city in Minnesota, right at the point of Lake Superior. So if you go like that, right there, it's right there. Um, and I loved it up there. I mean, the lake was so large, it was like growing up on the ocean. Even though I was 6 blocks away from it, we'd have to take our bikes down there to see it. But I would go down to the shore every now and then when I was old enough to let, you know, have permission to do it. Um, and the hill is right there. So it's almost like it's a port city. So it's almost like a mini San Francisco in a lot of ways. Um,
Wow.
it's a wonderful place. But when I grew up there, it was still trying to recover from taconite industry and shipping industry, and it was kind of at a low point of finding its footing. It has since that time, but it was a very there wasn't a lot of opportunity up there. When I got into music, I had a band before All the Pretty Horses. I did about as much as you could do in the small town, or a small city, a big town, a small city. Um, I did all that I could do. We caught the attention of a manager in Minneapolis who talked to us and encouraged us to relocate down to Minneapolis. So as a band, we decided, yeah, well, we got to. Um, and that was in the '80s, and we rented a house in St. Paul, in one of the tougher neighborhoods in St. Paul. That's all you can afford. Five of
Right.
us, and all jumped into this three-story Victorian house that was pretty rundown, and tried to make a go of it. My manager at that time was able to work with us for about, maybe half a year, and then his business went bankrupt, and we were on our own. And but we weren't going to move back. We were already established, so we just stayed there. And that band fell apart after a while, and I went into art and filmmaking, and eventually performance art. And at in the '90s, actually in 1993, at the end of 1993, I circled back, ran into my drummer from that first band, and we formed All the Pretty Horses.
That's amazing. And was music always present in your household? Was mom and dad from what was your draw to
No,
music? Who was your
no.
early influences?
So my dad was a draftsman, although he did a lot of architect work also, but he just didn't go to school to get that definition, that title. But he also was a painter and a realist artist on the side. I had an artistic upbringing. I was always free to work in art and being creative. Music was something I found on my own. I guess the stories are that my grandmother played guitar I never met her. She died before I was born. But that would have been the closest musical influence that I would have, and that would have to be through DNA, I suppose. Um, but I grew up watching the Monkees on TV, and I saw David Bowie on the Midnight Special early, and I heard Space Oddity when it first came out on the radio in my mom's car when she was shopping and at Target over the hill, and I was blown away. It was at night, and of course, I was looking at the stars sitting in the parking lot waiting for her to come back. So my influences to work in music were I liked the idea of a band from the Monkees, that was just fun. But David Bowie really brought this heart to the idea of being a musician, and a
I love it.
purpose to it. Space Oddity is a story about astronaut who is lost in space and can't get home. Um, it was just magical to realize that I could write lyrics and imagine some way that I could bring an art form that could say something, could say things. And then of course Bowie was playing with the gender stuff at that time, the Ziggy Stardust era. And that
Right, right.
fascinated me because I knew that was inside of me. But I was so shamed by it because of society
Mhm.
and that attitude, and closeted, of course. So, but it was part of who I was. I knew. And so I was attracted to what he was doing, and I paid attention. As I got older, I kept following him. And then the punk era unfolded, and that made the possibility of doing my own music. Before that, it was the 70s, and everything was produced. Radio was horrible.
Right.
Although the movie the what is it? What is the new movie, the trilogy out there, Protectors of the
Lord
Galaxy?
of the Rings.
Well, anyway, they do. Somebody out there listening will know exactly. I have ADHD. I should say that right now. So things like this, just boom, they're gone. I have no idea what happens to them. It'll
I
come
hear
to
you.
me after we're done. Um, uh, anyway, they were doing 70s music and that, and I those were the best ones, and it brought back some good memories. But I kind of turned off the radio at that time. And
Right.
I just felt like it was impossible. Everything was produced, everything had to be in a recording studio. You had to have a record label. It seemed impossible. But then when the punk era came out, it was all DIY, and it was music that anybody could do. And you could power through, and it could be messy, and it could be boisterous, and it could break all the rules. And that was inspiring to me to try to record and to work. And that's when we formed a cover band to do punk music. And then we started playing with recording, trying to figure that out with cassette decks. You had two cassette decks, and you go back and forth. Um, and I'm a chatterbox. I'm sorry. I will go
No,
on
that's
and
okay. I love it. You're bringing back memories. I'm so old that my first music was Captain and Tennille on an 8-track player. So believe me, you're bringing me back,
remember
my
eight
friend.
track players. Yeah. Yeah. So, eventually when I formed an original band with that before the band that brought us down to Minneapolis. Then we were really looking at actual recordings and reel to reel at that time, and getting into, with the help of my manager at that time, we got into a couple formal recording studios to record an EP, which I never released except for one song. Um, and that is I Am Human, which is on, if you look up there, right where my finger is, that's my first album. That is actually a special release of my first album called Animal Angst,
Wow,
um,
that's
which I
amazing.
did. It came out in 1984. And that cover here, well, just let me grab it. So
Ooh, I
that is
love
cover,
that.
and
Yeah.
that's my dead name here, and then that's my regular name. And I hand screen these. I came across 22 of the actual vinyls remaining. The original covers, which I also hand screened, got destroyed in a basement flood. Um, but I found these, and I decided to re-release the actual original thing, and 22 of them. And so
That's
I
amazing.
designed that special hand two-color version of the original album, and I added in there a CDR, which is enhanced, so it has one video of our a performance we did in like 1980 of one of the songs. Um, Long story short, it's a round and round. That album actually made it out to Germany somehow. I don't know how it did. It was kind of a DIY
Wow.
synth album, which I made after that band that brought us down to Minneapolis broke up, and I had already got the musical bug, and by then I had obtained a 4-track reel to reel and a Tap Go mixing board, professional mixing board at the time. The band had, accumulated that, but I had gotten that 4-track from my spouse who worked at a film production place at that time. And it was one of their old ones that they were throwing away, and she bought it for nothing and gave it to me for Christmas.
Going all out.
Yeah, and so
Talk
I
to me when
recorded.
you're doing your songwriting process, everything. Are you more of because glam and punk and everything have such a sound to them? Are you a
Mhm.
melody, or do you hear music first, or do you hear lyrics first, or does it really
Ah,
kind of depend?
well, yes, thank you. Get me off my ADHD chatterbox track. Get me back on time and on task. Keep doing that. Um, yes, my songwriting. I play with chords and in melody first on my guitar, and I have I didn't start this way, but I ended up defaulting to a drop D tuning, which is basically taking the lowest string E and down tuning it to D so it matches the D, which
Okay.
is the third string up. Um, and so the chords don't make sense. Traditional chords don't make sense. I kind of make them up. I don't read music. I don't know musical theory, anything. So I play by ear, and I just make up chords, and I keep playing until I hear something nice and creative and different. And then I add my vocals to it, but I don't do lyrics. I just kind of scat across that with syllables and consonants and that kind of thing. And I just try to find a vocal line which goes through it. And once I find something I like, and I'm recording all of this, so it's just all this stuff that I record. And then when I find that, then I start going into the consonants and try to find a word or something that matches that rhythm and
Right.
structure. And then if I find a word that rings true to me, it will kind of unlock a story or a concept or an emotion that I'm struggling with or working with, and then I will slowly, for kind of from that little point, kind of build out and create the lyrics from that point.
I
And yeah,
I love that. How long does that? How much tape does that process take? It sounds like it's a big process for you, but it's such an amazing way to work. I love that.
well, in the old days, I would do it on a cassette recorder, and then I would just go back. I'd listen to it on my in my car and review it and get it in my head and keep playing with it. Then I carried a recorder around, so I would record that. Well, with new technology, we have phone recorders, so I use my phone, and I'll take my laptop or my iPad and put it, open it up and just play my guitar, acoustic guitar, and sing in it. It takes quite a bit of back and forth. And some songs I've actually gone back and dug through my old. In fact, even with Scars, I discovered that I had an early version of that little riff and melody from I think 2010 or 11. And I had forgotten because I'd worked so hard on that song to bring it up to the final thing. But it was one of those times when I was going back and digging through my old files, and I must have come across it and pulled it out as a possibility. And it took 10 years, but then that little kernel developed into the song I just released. So,
I love that. I'd always wish we could dig through the archives of artists and singers like you because there's always some little gems there that you've forgotten about that none of us know that's always kind of fun. So it's love to kind of create like that and to find these little inspirations.
Yeah.
When did you first start letting your gender expression work into your music?
Right. So I came out in 1988. Um, that was my first admitting to myself and then to those closest to me that I was trans. That was still not, it was not the way it is now. It was still, we were seen as fetishists back then. And the only way to be legitimate about it was to be transsexual. And I actually did come out as transsexual first. But there was no option to pursue that path because nothing was, insurances wouldn't pay for it. So, and it was way financially out of reach for normal everyday people. Um, so it was a path which I knew I should be following, but I had no way to follow it. So why not just explore the cross dressing, which is the term back then, to pursue that? And I found an underground club um, through a therapist. Actually, the therapist I came out to found for me, and it was an alternate, cheaper support possibility for me to follow that discovery and admitting that to myself. And I joined that club with my spouse. It was called the CLCC. It's not existing now, but it was existing back then in the 80s and 90s. And that allowed me to become more myself. I had already established myself as an artist, a performance artist by then, and so I brought my trans identity into that world, the art world, and I began to do that. The art world was more receptive to that. They liked the challenge. They were also shocked by it because it was so new and it wasn't defined. There was no community. There was no trans community back then. It's hard to even imagine that, but there was nothing. It was just us as individuals who were trying to say that we are more than just a fetish. It's more than just a fetish. And so bringing that into my art world and performance stage was a way for me to say, this is more than that. Um, and then when the band formed, I did it right off the bat. 1993. I was my trans self. I had a discussion with my two new founding bandmates at that time, Billy, the drummer, and Ed Ford, the bass player. And I said, "This is who I am, and I am intending to do that on stage and deal with it." And they were shocked and worried and concerned, but Ed had the best phrase. He said, "Well, then we're just going to have to become famous." So uh,
I love that. Good on
fight
him.
against
That's amazing.
what we thought was going to unfold, which it was an uphill battle continually, all the way through. It did
But
derail
did
a
that
normal progress for a band.
right? But did that performance art phase kind of give you that chance to experiment? Because I think it was so new at the time, everyone just thought that's supposed to be avant-garde, right? So they were they putting labels on at the time, or were you putting labels on, or was it just fun to experiment with it and you're taking it to heart and everyone else just going, okay, that's just pushing boundaries? How was it perceived at that time through both the community that was coming to see the performance art and through yourself?
All of the above. I was seen as pushing boundaries. Pronoun use was not something that any of us, so I was still he back then, referred to in the press and whatever reviews, he or him. Eventually, I was adding as transgender. That was something that they gave to me because that's how I referred to myself. Um, I lived 24/7, so it wasn't like drag. Um, Although some press tried to kind of push me in that direction, but then they couldn't because that was how I presented all the time. And it wasn't drag. And when I went into music and started doing it, it became important for me to prove that it wasn't drag. By then, I had obtained I found a kind doctor who believed me and allowed me to get hormones and set me up with an endocrinologist who also I had to self-advocate everything. I was not supposed to be able to do that at that time. Um, but I was very, very lucky and I got that. So I was able to begin developing breasts and in the rock and roll stage, I was not shy about that. I used pasties. I was topless. I still am for the big shows. And I took on a dominant, fetishized dom persona in on stage because that gave me strength. The typical idea about a trans woman back then was somebody who was submissive or not somebody who was in control, somebody who would be dominated, right? The whole fetish world type of
Right.
thing, the
Yeah.
kink world. I tried to change the tables on that. And so I took on the dominant appearance on stage. And I still do that. But that was a way for me to prove that this was not drag. This was me 24/7. And the rock and roll audiences, which were not as receptive as the art world, but we built our fan base. Uh, it helped prove my authenticity by doing that. And that gave us credibility. Even people that weren't really okay, I don't really like what you're doing, but they couldn't say I was pretending. That was
Right.
important.
Well,
So
that's the whole thing. You were
yeah,
consistent and so strong with it, and music changes, right? I mean, Bowie goes from Ziggy Stardust to suit and tie and everything, and so
yeah,
everyone think it's a phase, but this is your life you're living, right? So you
right.
need that authenticity to stay through. So I can imagine that had to be a little bit of challenge as artists and music's changing around you, and you're coming into your own. That had to be a kind of a different space to be in for a while, I would think.
Yes, it was. The press at that time did not take us seriously. Um, Other Minneapolis bands, this would have been the grunge era. So Babes in Toyland, I'm friends with Lori, actually. Um, they got signed and were doing wonderfully, and Husker Du. Um, and I was friends with um, Grant Hart, who's gone now. Um, and there were other punk bands in Minneapolis that were all getting signed, and it was like a magical time for Minneapolis. But we were not. We were overlooked and dismissed because we were a phase. We were a fetish. We were a
Yeah.
novelty. And so we were treated as such by the industry and the press coverage. And it was a real struggle. I'm actually writing a memoir. It's a work in progress now. My spouse has already published a memoir about that time. And I'm a slow writer. She's an English professor, so she just pounded it out, And
Right.
I get to have the last word, so I'm still writing mine, getting close. But
That's going to be some amazing work. I can't wait for that.
yeah, so I mean, I would get knocked down all the time, but I would get back up and keep pushing. And that was at the time when I felt like, well, if we're not going to be taken seriously, I couldn't even get into the normal clubs in Minneapolis at that time because they just didn't want to deal with us. So I brainstormed and decided we have to prove to everybody here in Minneapolis that we are worth their attention, right? So I decided I'm going to tackle the biggest city I can imagine, which is New York. And I had earlier, through a travel study opportunity I had in the art world, I went out there, and a friend of mine who's a performance artist um, and a curator who had relocated out there took me around and introduced me to the clubs, introduced me to the scene. This is before internet, really, so you wouldn't have known it if you weren't there on the ground. And I was just blown away by it. And it was drag punk. There's a drag punk scene going on out there. And
Wow.
I was like, oh, we can do this. We can be part of this. And I met the owner of the Meow Mix, a lesbian bar out there. Um, and and I talked with her, and we actually emailed back and forth with faxes because it was before cell phones and long distance cost too much, and we
Right.
had more to talk about than just that. And nobody trusted the internet back then. Emails, nobody trusted that. So you had to get a contract and agreement on something hard, and faxes were that. So I've actually faxed our first gig out there
That's amazing.
and our formal gig. We did do a drive out gig in '96, I think, a weekend. It was failed. It was failed. We could talk about that. It was just horrible. We didn't understand anything. But when we came
Right.
back in '98, that's when I understood how the scene worked out there. And that it wasn't the club, it was the promoters. That's what you wanted to get into. The nights the promoters were putting together. That's how you did it.
Right.
And once I understood that, that's how I started doing it. And so our first gig was at the Meow Mix, and we went out there, and then we built from that. And the clubs and the promoters and the booking people out there knew that we were coming from out of town, and they suspended their requirement of not more gigs than within a week of each other for the local bands. But they knew we were coming so far, so they were just like, ah, don't worry about it, just whatever you can get. So we would go out for a weekend, and we'd do 3 gigs in a weekend at different clubs.
Now talk about that. We're talking about the business side. Have were you able to always balance the business with the music? Did you have someone else take care of that?
Mm.
Because it's such a kind of the bummer part of the entertainment business, right? That there is that business side of it. How do you like being in control of that side? Talk about that.
Well, I don't like being in control of that side, but I found it necessary. Um, because that was the only way I could make sure we were going in the direction I wanted to go. And so I did take over the main part of that. I would bring in some people that would help me with that. Um, so my co-manager, and this would have been 2000, I think, year 2000. One of my dancers, a new person that I recognize as potentially good to bring into the band, because she came to a show that we were doing outside, um, and there were some feminist, a group of feminist women who were not happy that I was presenting what they saw stolen sexuality. and they were throwing bottles at us. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's just kind of the way it was. It was a big audience. It was a full, big, hundreds of people out there. But this group of women were right up front, and they were just furious. And I got that a lot back then. Um, it was just a thing. I was seen as stealing femininity and abusing it because I was so forward about what I did on stage, and they didn't really understand the context of where I was and what I was coming from. Of course, they were expressing their anger by throwing bottles, and
Right.
this individual, Shannon Blowtorch, I will give you the name now, stepped in front of them and kept blocking their way. They couldn't throw bottles, and finally just told them off and said, if you don't like it, leave. And they did.
Wow.
And I saw this unfold while I'm performing and seeing it. So after the show, I talked to Shannon, and she was doing some performance art stuff with another group and said if I ever wanted some help with anything or dancing. And so I brought her on as a dancer first. And then I realized she was very smart and had the kind of mind that I do with the puzzle of the promotion. And so I took her on as an assistant management, and eventually she became my co-manager, and we worked together and got the band all through New York and out to England for 2 tours of England. And yeah, she was an invaluable person. Because I have phone phobia, it was hard for me to talk on the phone, and that was kind of the only vehicle, and she didn't have
Right.
that. So I'd tell her what to say, and
Wow.
then she would just like power through. And then she
That's
was like,
amazing.
she could separate herself from the band, so she could talk as the manager, not a band member selling the band. People
Right.
took you more seriously if you were talking to somebody who worked for the band rather than a band member. So I
Right.
figured that
Right.
out pretty early on. Um, yeah, so I did that, and then I had a tour manager also. Another was a song person originally, Matthew Hopping, who lives in New Zealand now. But I brought him in to do. We became friends, and I knew he was doing sound, so I brought him in as our sound person. And he eventually relocated to New York, where he fell in love with his husband. Then they're no longer together, but they're friends. Um, who is from New Zealand? That's why Matthew is in New Zealand now, because they could get married in New Zealand. Um,
Right.
this is before anything changed
Way
here.
back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And he became my tour manager, and so he helped book all the band out there in New York. He could kind of know what was going on and who was the new promoter, what was the new nights, blah blah blah. So he was very good and very helpful for me there. Um, so yeah, I did get people to come in and help me, but I was the main person. I could make the final decisions, and I
Right.
projected out the ideas, and I created the strategy and all that stuff. Yeah.
I have so much more to talk to you about, but we got to start wrapping things up here. So I want to definitely get these last two questions in, and then we have to have you back because we got to talk more about the music. But tell me a little bit. The two things I really want to know is how has the music industry changed, if at all, for the acceptance of trans and non-binary since you began? Obviously, you had such
Yeah.
obstacles you overcome. How do you see the music industry now towards trans and non-binary artists?
Okay, we have to do another one because I have so much more to say. I've been doing this for 30 years. Um, in my opinion, it was when Laura Jane Grace came out in 2013 with her Rolling Stone article. And I had the privilege to tour with her in 2014 for the West Coast end of her tour at that year. She invited me, and it was through Shannon again, who had connected with her, with Laura, and introduced the two of us. And I went and talked with Laura backstage at First Avenue at one of her gigs, and we talked and shared our own journeys. And within a couple of months, she reached out to me and invited me to open for them. My opinion is her coming out changed the dialogue. Here's the difference. In 2001, I had a meeting with a big music lawyer in New York right after 9/11. In a high-rise building overlooking Ground Zero. So while I was waiting for the meeting to unfold, I looked down and watched them try to figure out what happened down there. And it was Matthew who put that meeting together. Now, this would have been our person if they took us on, who would work out a deal with the major labels. This is how you do it. So this was our break. This was our big break. And in 2001, when the lawyer came out and talked with us, it was very complimentary. And he was an African-American man. And so I was just thought, okay, he's going to know all about what we're struggling with and blah, blah, blah. This is going to work. And the first thing he said was, ask me if I would consider not being trans publicly. And so I could still be glam, I could still do my stuff, but cover the breasts. Don't make it so public. Would I consider doing that? And I said, of course not. This is why you're talking to us, because we wouldn't have gotten to this point if I had been that shy. I'm not changing. And he said, I knew you were going to say that. And he was very complimentary on our music and what we were doing, and wished us the best, but he said there was no way he could sell us to any of the labels if I remained out as trans. It just was not going to work. And I knew at that point, and then we were on the that was the weekend we were going off to England to tour our first tour there that we had put together. And I was feeling very confident in myself, and I was like, well, fuck you then. We're going to do it on our own. You're going to be sorry. Well, it never worked. We couldn't break into the mainstream. We couldn't. We tried and we could not. We established ourselves as on the underground. But Laura and Against Me had already were already signed. They had already broken in as a regular punk band into that. So when Laura came out, she had leverage, right? She had a record label that had invested in her, and they were like, "Whoa, shit! What are we going to do now?" And because of that, they decided to continue investing in her, and capitalize on that. Put together that interview in Rolling Stone, but that article came out, and I think it changed the dialogue. I think that one thing changed the dialogue. There were other people that came out, Caitlyn Jenner, of course, for the right wing came out.
Right.
There were other people that came out at that point who were significant, but in the music industry, I think it was that. That's my feeling.
I love that.
And once that dialogue began and people saw that having somebody who was trans as an out trans person in the above ground world, everybody saw money. Everybody saw numbers. I was trying to tell them that for decades, but they wouldn't listen to me, you know.
Yeah,
Um, so so it worked, and that cracked it. That cracked the ceiling, and everything has
I love
changed
that.
now. Everything has changed.
We have so much more to talk about. Okay, last question I'll do, but then oh my gosh, I have so much I want to say. Anyway, last question. talk about, you've always been so supportive on stage since you've done this. It's so strong for the LGBTQ community, so outspoken, so proud. How is it now to see that it's not really being reciprocated that much for the trans community from the rest of our LGBs? That's got to be a little disappointing, I would think. Or do you see that or not see that?
So I lived the days when we had no rights, we didn't have a community, and the gay lesbian communities did not recognize us as a part of their family, a part of the umbrella. Um, Bisexuality was even controversial back then.
Right.
I lived those days. We're seeing all of those same tropes, all of those same things coming back right now. It's going to happen. People are afraid. People are afraid of losing power. That's what it is. And I am sorry if it's coming from the gay, lesbian, bisexual community are feeling displaced by the attention that is being given to trans people. And the same thing saying the anti-trans stuff and these people are not real women and not real men and blah, blah, blah. They're eating what the right wing is feeding them. And they're feeling threatened by that. And so they are pushing us away. Same thing happened with the gay the gay revolution. Trans people were seen as pulling that down. We were, and the fetish, the leather men back then were also pushed out because the gay movement was seeing that as a liability, right? Well, they're doing
And
it
you were the
again.
ones that were starting it back then. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness,
yeah,
that's
we
crazy.
were front line at Stonewall and things that happened before Stonewall because we were the targets, we were the visible ones.
Right.
Um, so it's going to happen. But here's what I will say: I'm here. I made it through. I never stopped working. I'm not going anywhere. And anybody right now who is afraid of what's happening right now, we're going to get through it. We're not going anywhere. I don't care if we have to go back in the underground. If this election that's coming up is going to flip the tables on everything and we get oppressed, we're not disappearing. We're going to be there and we're going to know how to communicate to each other and we will exist and we will survive.
Well said. Amen, sister. Thank you for that. Well, I got to tell you, Venus, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we have about another hour and a half worth of show left, so we will have to have you come back for part 2 and part 3. Remind everyone where they can find this fantastic new music you have coming out and where they can follow you on social media, please.
Well, I have a band camp. That's the best way to get to it directly. Oh, and here she is. This is Batgirl. There, at the last minute.
Hello
um,
there, lady. I love it.
So Venus to Mars Bandcamp. That has I'm bringing out my older catalog plus the new stuff there, and you can get the full length and also some of the merchandise that I have, records and that kind of stuff. Um, I'm also on all the streaming services and all of that, iTunes, Pandora, Spotify, all that. You can find me, Venus to Mars. You might have to add Venus to Mars and All the Pretty Horses. It's, I've had such a long career. I put things out under just All the Pretty Horses and just
Right?
Venus. And I'm trying to pull it all under Venus to Mars and All the Pretty Horses now. Crazy. But you can find me there. Social
Right.
media is the same way. And YouTube, of course, for the videos and all of that. And I'm slowly bringing all of that back up because it was old technology and everything is new now. So I got to restore all this old footage and make it 4K now if I can. So
There you go.
it's a
Well,
process.
Venus to Mars, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Left of Str8 Show interviews today. Stick around. We're going to try to do some 5 questions with Venus you can see next week, and we will definitely have her back for a part 2 of this interview. Venus, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
All right, stay on the line for me. Guys, we'll be back next time with another great interview. You're listening to Left of Str8 Show interviews right here in the Left of Str8 Podcast Network. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website for contests and other news and information. See you next week.